All right, thank you, sir. I don't even know what that is. All right, you guys about ready to get started? All right. If I could get one of you guys to close that door or pull it to or something along those lines. And I'm not sure why Dan's got me in that viewer, but we'll go ahead and get started. So if you weren't in my earlier session, my name is Jase McCarty, and I'm a technical marketing architect in the Storage and Availability Business Unit, or what we like to call SABU, S-A-B-U, or SABU, or something along those lines. All right, come on, Dan. There we go. All right, so really kind of the topic today is automating vSAN or HCI deployment at scale with PowerShell, PowerCLI. I'm going to go through some workflow examples, things like that, some common tasks and whatnot. And you guys will have access to this. Now this is just, see if it's going to start playing, come on. Yeah, Kyle made this particular demo, but just to give an example, here I think it didn't look like it's going to run, but basically it rolls through and does update maintenance on a bunch of hosts is what that was supposed to do. So you guys all use PowerShell now, right? Everybody? You guys all use PowerCLI? What version? I mean, some folks still use like 6.5, some folks use 6.5.4. 11.2 is our latest. Okay. Yeah, 11.2 is our latest. So I would highly recommend that you update to the absolute latest. Now, I don't have this in the deck per se, but we packaged PowerCLI as a binary up until about 6.5.1, I think it was, and there's a blog post on blogs.vmware.com/ I think PowerShell or PowerCLI, where we actually talk about how to get rid of the old binary method and you actually install from a Microsoft repository. Okay, but if you go that route, it makes it a lot easier. Now, I'm not going to go through the basics of PowerShell, and I will say that is anybody using, or will ask, is anybody using PowerShell Core? Okay, 1, 2. All right, Microsoft is moving everything to a PowerShell Core type format, and what this really means is you get like the PowerShell 5.1, and now it's like actually 6.2 on the Core side. Core runs on Linux, Windows, or Mac. The .NET stuff only runs on Windows. Not all of our commandlets have been moved over. Okay, so that's an important distinction to understand. We've got about 600 commandlets. I think it's probably approaching 700 at this point across a lot of different products. Now, if you notice here, we've got these that are in blue, and then green are in the multi-platform Core, supported by the Core version, whereas those that are in the blue are only supported from a Windows platform. So if you're managing, let's say, VUM patches as an example, notice VUM is in the blue. VUM can only be run from a Windows platform. And you probably won't ever see the VUM part run from a Core perspective. Okay, just a tip. Well, we're working on things all the time, so don't let that discourage you as far as that goes. Now, Microsoft has said that in 7.0, everything is going to be core based, if you will. But, and I don't know when what VUM may become or whatever. I don't know when that's going to come around, but we will have something to do lifecycle management. So don't worry about that as far as that goes. Now, typically from a workflow perspective, we've got to authenticate. We're going to go and retrieve whatever objects we're going to use, whether it be just through a explicit definition or if I'm actually pulling data. I'm going to evaluate what that value is, and then I may need to execute something, or maybe I'm just going to report. Those are kind of the basic script operations, if you will. If you had connectivity to my cluster at home, you could log into it actually with these credentials. These are the credentials I use. Okay. Now here I'm using explicitly calling the credential, the authentication piece here, but you could actually, I didn't update it in this slide. You could exclude that, and a pop-up would pop up and say, give me the credentials. Right now, from a PowerShell Core perspective, running on Linux or a Mac, it's not going to give you a pop-up. It'll just say username and password. All right, and I've got an example a little bit later where I cover kind of how you can store those credentials somewhere else if you want, if you don't want to go that route. Okay. Now some of this is remedial, so keep in mind I've got to hit a wide range of folks as far as capabilities, but keep in mind from retrieving information, I can go directly from a command line prompting. I can use a predefined variable. I can pull information from a specific commandlet, or I can read from a file, one or more files. Okay, I mean everybody still manages with Excel, right? I mean it's like the de facto IT, repository of information. I can also, whether it be an individual item, I can also put things into an array, prompt for multiple items here with comma as a separator, or I can specify 2 individual hosts or whatnot. ESX host equals get VM host. That will give me all the hosts as an object, not just a text value. For every host that's attached to that vCenter, whether it's connected or not, it will instantiate that into that array. Pull from a file. And here's kind of where I mentioned that Excel input, right? I can pull from CSV. Now, if I only want to retrieve particular items, this is where we get a little bit more advanced. Here I'm specifying a host name. Here I'm saying where the object is like that host name. I could actually use a wildcard here. And I could say, give me all the hosts that are in this particular domain. I can go even further and I can say, give me all the hosts in a particular data center. Let's say I've got different data center constructs for all my different locations. I could very easily point at one or the other as far as that goes. Here I've got a conditional statement. I'm saying, give me all the hosts, but only give me the ones that are connected. Okay. Now, from an actionable or using to perform actions, I can take this variable ESXi hosts, and I can say, well, let me write each host. Now, notice it's ESXi host in ESXi hosts plural. Think of that as item in items or item in list or something like that. Okay, and the reason that we want to use these loops is because whether I'm working with 2 hosts or 3 hosts or 4 hosts or 6 hosts, the code is the same as if I'm doing 500 hosts or 1,000 hosts, right? Right. Individual variables don't really scale well. These arrays do scale very, very well. That said, though, and I try to hammer this home to everybody, be careful with whatever code you're writing, especially if you're writing it at scale or running it at scale, because you could end up with a resume generating event. Right? All right, now here's an example, and this is vSAN centric, right, where I want to go and say, well, let me get the advanced setting of this particular entity, ESX host, and the vSAN CLOM repair delay. CLOM repair delay is actually the value for that rebuild timer, right, on each host in the vSAN cluster. Okay, so here I'm saying CLOM repair minimum, put this value into that. Okay, now what if I want to, depending on what that value is, do different things? That's where an if then else, possibly even a switch. Is anybody familiar with a switch? Like a case? Case in some languages, switch is what we use in PowerShell. Here I'm doing an if then else. Here I'm doing a switch. So if you notice this example I'm using, here I'm just grabbing the value. I'm saying, hey, here's the value. Here I'm saying if the value is equal to 60, say it's the default. If it's not 60, then say it's not the default. That only gives me a limited amount of value. Whereas if I use a switch as an example, I can say if it's 60, then write it's the right value. Here I'm saying otherwise, anything other than that, right, it's not the right value. But what if I've got multiple vSAN clusters where one is 60, one is 45, one is something else, all based on a particular either KB article recommendation, or I've got a particular host with a particular set of hardware that's got some nuance to it to take into account. Here I'm saying if it's 60, right, this is the default. If it's 45, then say it's 45 because of this KB article. And then otherwise, right, it's not the default. Okay. Some people within my part of the org has said, well, all this stuff that you're doing with PowerShell and PowerCLI and whatnot, it's really kind of like, it's like what's the word they used? Oh man, it's escaping me. It's like a handling the gaps, right? The little things in the UI that we don't do and that kind of stuff. I don't look at it from that perspective. I look at this as ad hoc management, right? Because, and I've got an example here in a minute that will go even deeper into this, right? So here, I'm saying for every host in this remote data center, for every host, put that into this variable, go through each host, check that CLOM repair delay setting. If it's correct, then say it's right. Otherwise, say it's not right. Change that setting. Notice I've got this confirm false. If I have, let's say I have 30 clusters with 30 hosts each. That's what, carry the 900 hosts, right? I'm kidding. I don't want to hit yes 900 times. So confirm false is basically saying go ahead and accept what I'm trying to accomplish. Okay. Again, resume generating an event, so be careful. But here I'm changing that value, and then I'm saying, hey, it just got corrected. This I'm doing one data center. Now look at the location remote data center. Notice I've changed it to a data center variable. I'm saying give me all the data centers. For every data center in the list of data centers, perform this. I just went from one little script to do everything on one cluster to one script that every data center that I've got, every cluster and every host are all taken care of at once. Right? I call this the reverse impact method. Don't force it, use a hammer. That's one of my stupid little jokes, but my son calls them dad jokes, right? All right, so from a deployment task perspective, like I put together a PowerShell script. I've got a link at I think toward the end of this presentation. Here, notice nothing here has anything to do with vSAN technically other than the name. Here I'm looking for a cluster. If it doesn't exist, create it. Or a data center. Here I'm looking for a cluster. If that cluster does not exist, then create it. Okay, notice though I'm using a while not. I'm saying while this entity does not exist, continue to attempt to run. If I'm already in the operation, it's not going to do anything until it's complete. Okay. Quite often from a vSAN perspective, we'll use distributed switches. Anybody in here not using distributed switches with vSAN? Okay. But you see the value in using distributed switches, right? Where you can go in and actually custom tailor the
It's one of the reasons why we're still on standard switches, because one of the people who built out some environment is very fluent in PowerCLI. For him, he'd just rather take that hammer and manage it automatically manually.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I like DSs. In fact, the sample code that I don't have all of it displayed with the link to where you can go and pull it. I actually have a script that will go and look at your NIC speeds, and based on the NIC speeds, it will automatically add the ones that are greater than 1 gig to the VDS. Otherwise, it won't add them to the VDS, regardless of the name. And we'll cover that in a sec. But here I'm saying, okay, I don't see the switch. Let me make a switch. But let me also add some additional parameters to it. Like I want to use LLDP. I want to use link discovery, LDP operation to both. The reason I want to set that to both is because I want the network person to be able to see what port is talking up to the network as they look at LLDP from a switch perspective. And I also, from within the vSphere client, I want to be able to see switch information, right? I can custom tailor how many ports I've got, what version, my MTU speeds. I'm missing a quote here, I just realized. Everybody makes mistakes, right? Here I'm saying create a vSAN port group, giving it the name vSAN. I want to do 8 ports, VLAN ID 10, whatnot. Here, each one of these I'm saying create it if it does not exist. And then I'm going back and I'm actually here in this particular line, I'm saying give me that object with all of its extended properties. Okay. Now, is anybody in here using 6.7 with the cluster QuickStart yet? Okay, everybody's on 5.5, 6.0. Who's on 6.0 or vSAN 6.2? How about 6.5? Okay, all right. Cluster QuickStart gives us an option now where we can say add a bunch of hosts all at once. Makes it really, really easy. It wasn't like that previously. Here I can say I've got an array, host 1, host 2, host 3, add them all. This force here says accept that that certificate. You know, when you go and you add a host manually and it's like, do you want to accept this certificate? Yes. What this does. I don't have to necessarily pass these credentials, though, as part of that command line or that command being run. I can actually tie them into a credential store item. Here I'm reading that credential store item from mycred.xml, which I could, with the lack of a better term, hide behind permissions or control behind permissions where only the right people have access to use that, as an example. Here I'm saying add the host location cluster using the credentials that I just read in. And that could change over time. You could have completely different people in control of that particular file. All right. Now, from a vSAN perspective, we do have to add hosts to the VDS to be able to consume that VDS. Here I'm hard coding NICs 2 and 3. I've got some other sample code, as I mentioned before, that is a bit more dynamic. Here I'm saying add the host to the VDS. So I'm saying the VD switch object, add host to it. And because I'm doing a loop, I'm going through each one. And additionally, I am working on each host. I'm saying add each one of these physical NICs to that VDS. Right? All right. And notice again, confirm false, because I don't want to answer yes every single time. Now this is one that is a bit of sample code of my own, truly my own creation. Here what I'm doing is I'm saying grab the last octet of VMK0 of that IP. And the reason being is I want to make sure that if I'm using whatever.5 for my management, I want my vMotion and my vSAN to be .5 on whatever subnet they're on. Are you guys OCD like me when it comes to that, right? It's nothing worse when you get into, you inherit an environment and you go in and like all IPs are all over the place. And it's just like, oh my God, I've got to fix this, you know? So what I'm doing here is I'm saying for this host, get the network, expand the virtual property of that NIC where the device is VMK0. And from that VMK0, I'm doing a split command to only grab the last octet, that last value. You see my vSAN IP is 192.168.150, and then I'm appending that last octet. And then I specify my subnet mask. So when I create that vSAN interface, pardon me, I ensure that that vSAN VM kernel IP, that last octet, matches my management interface. And so I can sleep at night.
The -1 is getting you the last.
The last item.
Okay, so the -1
is pointing at that last item.
Okay, so -2 would be the second to last, or the.
Into it
Okay,
to be specific, but when I tried a couple different variables, and the split documentation pointed me at that. Okay, it's been a while since I put this together. I've been reusing it. All right, here I'm gonna the title is incorrect on this particular slide, but here I'm going to enable vSAN, and in the process of enabling it, I'm turning on HA, I'm turning on DRS. Notice here, though, I come right behind and I set the configuration to it after it's been created, and then I'm saying enable deduplication and compression. Now, in our infinite wisdom, let me back up. If you're using, let's say, deduplication and compression, and you're also using encryption, our typical recommendation is to apply them both or enable them both at the same time, or disable them both at the same time, because you have to do a rolling reformat process. But in the infinite wisdom of our PowerCLI developers in the storage and availability business unit, they didn't put one commandlet together to do both of those. So going via commandlet, you actually have to do it twice, which is not our recommended mechanism. I do have sample code in a link a little bit later where I go kind of the backdoor route, make some specifications, and then apply both of those at the same time. Okay. All right. Now this is another one that I wrote. If you've been using vSAN for a while, previous to 6.6, we would auto-claim disks. We would go and say, give me a list of the disks, and I'm going to just arbitrarily assume that these are cache and these are capacity, and I'm going to try to make it even. Well, it got to the point where more and more customers were adopting all-flash vSAN, and it got to the point where we had to deprecate that auto-claim disk process. It hasn't been enabled since 6.6, but here what I'm doing is I'm using a regular ESXi host call to get all the SCSI LUNs that are eligible for use as vSAN disks. Okay, so I can't pull a disk that's not eligible. I don't even need to try. Here I'm saying, well, let me get a count of all those disks. If the count is greater than 1, and it really probably needs to be greater than 2 for that matter. And I'm saying make a dynamic array cache disks and capacity disks. Go through each one of those disks and put them either in that cache array or that capacity array. Right? Because I need to keep a track of which ones are cache and which ones are capacity. Here I'm just using an arbitrary value of 600 for the lab that I was working in, but you could make this dynamic if you wanted to. And I have seen some customers that have all their disks are the exact same size and they're all mixed use. So they would have to modify that a little bit as far as that goes for this to work. But dependent on whether it is an SSD and it's larger than this size, I'll either put it in cache or capacity. I'm assuming that I have truly an all-flash or I have a hybrid config, one or the other. I'm not assuming that I have a mix. I could add some additional error checking. Okay. Now, here what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, for all my cache disks, if I have a total number of, let's say, 3 cache disks, I'm going to take that total amount of capacity and divide it by 3, and I'm going to break those up into multiple symmetrical group sizes, if you will. So if I had 22 capacity disks, I would end up with 7, 7, and 7 with 1 spare, and that 1 spare would just not be consumed because I like to keep things even, and we typically recommend uniform distribution. Okay, and that using this grouping, right? What I'm doing here is I'm breaking this up by that group size to go through and actually create that disk group. Okay, this is custom code that I put together a while back. Now, some of the common tasks that we'll see from a vSAN perspective, and keep in mind the update manager stuff has to be run on, which I'll get to in just a bit, has to be run on Windows. But here I'm saying getting a host, name 3, put it in maintenance. This may or may not, typically doesn't lately throw an error. If we've got vSAN hosts, then we want to put them into, or we want to use vSAN data migration mode, ensure accessibility or full control or whatever your particular normal method is, right, as far as that goes. We typically recommend ensure accessibility. But what about customers that have 20 sites, 30 sites, 40 sites, and they've got multiple node 3s of 4-node clusters? This piece of code here, I can hit every node 3 across the entire enterprise and put them in maintenance mode, right? Because we all like doing everything serially, right? Especially when I've got 1,000 hosts. We do one at a time. No, I would like to hit a lot of them at once. You know, obviously these are going to be in different clusters, right? Okay, and here I'm actually getting a baseline for the host, and then I can apply a baseline to a host. These are good old-fashioned VMware-based entries as far as how many retries I want to do, disable any media devices. There's an additional check I think coming that says if the host comes back up and there are errors, you can ignore that or not. That's something new here lately. Disable distributed power management, whatnot. Oop. All right, now I'll be honest, completely and totally honest that yeah, it's been kind of a pain in the butt when it comes to updating drivers for storage controllers, right? Especially if you have to go and create a baseline, upload a VIB, you know, whatnot, do it with VUM, so on and so forth. David Stamen put this script together, and this is a script that he's using Get ESXCLI version 1, not version 2, and he's putting an array here to install. This is an LSI Logic 9361-8i based update, and he's applying it to all hosts in a cluster, even checking to make sure that the VIB was installed properly. Now, to complement this script is he'd probably want to go behind it and do a put a host in maintenance mode, reboot, and cycle through, because a lot of these type VIBs will require a reboot. But if you notice at the bottom, it's actually his URL is down there, right? And this is going to be available for you guys. Okay. Is anybody using vSAN encryption? Not yet. Possibly at some point. Possibly. Okay.
We're going to be doing the hospital
Uh-huh.
There's certain departments that get data from the government,
Uh-huh.
and their checklist for the levels of hoops you have to jump through to get the data. Right now they're in an isolated environment
Yeah.
because I can't meet some of the requirements, so we just sort of just isolate them and just say, okay, you guys have your data, nobody else can get to that data. We want to put them in VDI because they're running on Windows 7 desktop, and right now the data is sitting on the desktops encrypted because depending on how you read the rules that the government gives you,
Mm-hmm.
and I've spoken to different people. They say, well, if it's not connected to the internet, it doesn't have to be encrypted. But then I've spoken to other people
Yeah.
in the same program that said, no, if anybody else has access to that network outside of the people that need access,
Then it needs to be
then it
encrypted.
has to be
Yeah.
encrypted, which
Yeah.
means I need to do SMP3, which means I need Windows 10,
Right.
and that's what a new VDI environment is going to be. It's going to be VDI 10 with VMware View and vSAN encryption.
Yeah. Okay. So vSAN encryption, and what this does, and the funny thing was, is when I wrote this, and this is sample 2200 on code.vmware.com, I wrote this before we had a commandlet for it. And we now have a commandlet that's like start-vSAN encryption configuration, something like that. Here I'm using get vSAN view, which we exposed to kind of get around when we don't have commandlets available. Okay, so if you'll notice here, I'm saying get this view of the vSAN cluster config system variable. Here what I'm doing is I'm taking the, notice I'm saying get cluster config method, or vSAN cluster get config. I'm pointing at the managed object reference of that cluster, and I'm grabbing the value data encryption config. Now notice before I was talking about if then. I'm saying if I've got vSAN enabled and it's encrypted, if it's got encryption enabled, then I want to give the option of performing a rekey function. Now here I'm actually asking for rekey action. I'm saying false or true for, or false for shallow, true for deep. They're a little bit different. The thing I like about this type of operation is, and I worked 5 years in health insurance. I worked 5 years at a data loss company, Equifax. I didn't work for that department, but I worked at Equifax. I worked for a little lending part. We had a lot of PCI and SOX and whatnot. And anytime our auditors were like, well, when's the last time you did a key rotation? And we'd have to, go and pull logs and all this other kind of stuff. Here I could very easily tie this to a scheduled task and say, we do a shallow rekey every week and we do a deep rekey every quarter. Here's the proof of that, right? That's just one more thing to get an auditor off your back, as far as that goes. Most of you guys deal with auditors, or who in here doesn't deal with an auditor of some type, internal or external? Okay, right. So things like this that are consistent, repeatable, and you can provide, hey, proof of we did this at this time and here's what it did. I really like. You ought to see my expense reports. I mean, I'll go in and submit an expense that looks questionable. I'll put 3 or 4 paragraphs in the summary, and they've got to the point lately where they're like, yeah, no, I'm not even going to read it. And that's, I learned that in the military too, is as long as you provide enough documentation that says this is why I did it, I did my best due diligence, blah, 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 they're going to say fine, whatever, and they're going to press on, right? All right, some more advanced examples. Does anybody spin up a vSAN lab from time to time? Spin it up, tear it down, spin it up, tear it down, that type of thing? Okay. This is an example to go and remove all of your vSAN disk groups. Do not run this on a production cluster. Okay. You'll see some similarities though. Notice in each one of these, I'm code.vmware.com/samples and then a number. All these pieces of code are live out there on code.vmware.com. In fact, we're now rolling these into storagehub.vmware.com as well, which is really more storage centric. I really need to update this slide, but I had to personally write each of these like probably 15 or 20 times to figure out how to properly write this in PowerShell. Now, the sample is here, 2108, but vSAN is really based on policies, right? We do a single data store, and based on how we apply a policy or what a policy's rules are, we apply that to a VM and we press on, right? What if I've got multiple independent environments that are different? or I spin up a new environment. Let's say I'm a VAR and I'm working with a bunch of different customers, and I want to have a different set of policies after I do that deployment to make available to them. Then I can use code like this to immediately create all those policies. Now this is a bit crude compared to some a link I'm going to point you guys at in just a bit. But I'll say that this gets the job done. Now, what if has anybody ever had to destroy a vCenter and recreate it? Like vCenter became corrupted, you rebooted it and had a file system issue and you had to redeploy it? What if you have to recreate all of your policies? That can be a major pain. I think it's, no, I need to update that slide. But I actually have a script that's been out there for a while to actually back up and restore your SPBM policies in vCenter. In fact, one of the guys at Veeam, one of their global architects, points at my script all the time as an addition to backing up vCenter with Veeam. He'll also invoke that and back up all the storage policies at the same time. Okay. Now, I didn't update the title on this slide, but have you ever had a question of where all of my devices are from an enclosure perspective? Hey, I've got this device 741. Where is it in my host? Well, it's in enclosure 1, slot 5. I wrote this very recently, sample 5539. I'm actually trying to modify it a bit, but this is not a great value to manipulate, pardon me. But what I want to do is add a sort capability where you could sort by the disk or sort by the host or sort by the capacity, or you could sort by the slot or whatever. I just hadn't got to that point yet. They don't give me a whole lot of time to tinker. This is actually one of my multiple duties as far as that goes. From a vSAN encryption perspective, let's tie back to that compliance conversation, sample 2783. Here I'm looking at an encrypted vSAN cluster. We see that the overall configuration is red. The KMS health is yellow. Talking to vCenter in the KMS, it's all green. Everything looks good. Notice here I've got 8 disks on this host. 4 don't have an encryption issue. 4 do have an encryption issue. While I'm exposing the DEC generation ID, data encryption key generation ID, this is 3, the most current. This is 2. All right, what's the issue? Well, data encryption key is inconsistent. This needs to be a 3, so I need to remediate those. This next host down here actually can't talk to the KMS. This is something I could tie into the vCheck as an example. You know, Alan Renouf's vCheck that's been around for many, many years. All right, now this one, this sample 4052, it's not the easiest to read, but this is a soup to nuts, start to finish 2-node vSAN deployment script. You start with 2 hosts in a vCenter, and it will configure vSAN, configure a witness. It will configure the VDSs. It'll configure all of your IP, everything, start to finish, soup to nuts. It took me probably 6 or 7 months to put this together over time. So you guys don't have to pay for PSO. Yeah, PSO guys don't like me too much unless I'm writing code for them, which I typically don't. Here I'm using some hard-coded, stuff. You could easily change that, and it's out there for you to download. Now, notice here it says requires 2-node stretch cluster module. This 3734 script as well. I actually go and kind of I present some different scripts a little bit differently. Or some commandlets a little bit differently than we normally do, just to kind of align with that conversation. I don't want to do this. I want to skip around a little bit. And I don't have it on this what you call it. Dang it, I forgot about that. I wanted to show some other stuff, but I'm not going to be able to, unfortunately. All right, see if I can catch up real quick. And I'm happy to take questions and do my best to answer, but I can't click fast enough. What do you guys use to write PowerShell code? Do you guys use like Notepad++, or what do you use exactly? You guys ever heard of Visual Studio Codium or VSCode IAM as opposed to Visual Studio Code? Okay, I knew one person would. Visual Studio Code is Microsoft's tool, right? It's free and it works with other languages and whatnot. VSCode IAM is the exact same tool minus all the Microsoft telemetry data. So if you don't want to you don't want to, send stuff back to Microsoft, then look at VSCode IAM. And it installs the same exact way, same binaries. In fact, Microsoft takes the code that's in the VSCode IAM repository, and they add their telemetry data to it and recompile it.
Same plugins work?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So some references. I'll be honest with you. If you look at GitHub, and it's like github.com/Jase McCarty, you'll see that I've got some scripts that don't really align from a verb perspective. I've gotten a lot better, and that pointer is going to drive me nuts. But keep in mind that when you say new or invoke or set or things like that, those are potentially destructive commands, resume generating commands, right? As far as that goes, you can always use a -whatif behind them. But where I'm going at with this is from a punctuation perspective. I've personally gotten a lot better where I'm following the right verbiage these days. Now we do have some posters out on vmware.com/go/posters. You can find some PowerCLI posters. I hope to maybe by the end of the year have a storage PowerCLI poster, like dedicated just for storage operations. Maybe not just vSAN. I'm hoping to do some core storage as well. We had announced some additional SRM support for PowerCLI and API automation, so I'm hoping to maybe do some of that as well. It's just really time consuming. I have not gotten approval for it yet. PowerCLI blog, if you don't visit there, even if you don't go in, I mean, who reads release notes? Anybody? Yeah, when you have to, right? But normally not, right? So I had somebody reach out to me not too long ago, and they're like, hey, look, I'm trying to update some IP addresses on some Windows hosts using invoke VM script. And this code you've got from 2011 doesn't work anymore. What's going on? And I'm like, oh, it should work. But at the time I wrote that, I think maybe the code was 2009, I forget. But I was a customer when I wrote the code. Then I went to work for EMC, which at the time didn't have anything related to PowerShell, anything. So I didn't do a whole lot of it, and I kind of stepped away. When I came back to VMware, started getting back into it. Now, turns out that the set VM guest network adapter something or other commandlet was deprecated. In fact, it was deprecated in like 2011, and I found information on that on the blog, on the blog site. All right. PowerCLI community, I think that's VMTN related. Is anybody here in the VMware Code Slack? Highly, highly, highly recommend the VMware Code Slack. Yeah, the PowerCLI one specifically, yeah. So what will happen is, and I'll leave Slack running on my machine, Jake Robinson, who's our PM for PowerCLI and some other API products, Kyle Reddy, Luke Deakins, a guy out of Belgium who is a PowerShell wizard. We all kind of keep it open. And if I see somebody that says, hey, I'm looking for, somebody tell me how to update the policy on 500 VMs that are on vSAN. Anybody got a suggestion? And okay. I talked about code.vmware.com, a lot of samples. Oh, and let me back up real quick, talking about Visual Studio Code, VSCode IAM. They work with not only PowerShell from a scripting environment perspective, Bash and Python, Ruby and whatnot. This is something that I put out in January, a PowerCLI cookbook for vSAN. When I released it in January, it was version 1.0. As of about 2 weeks ago, toward the end of May, version 1.5. So I have made some updates. The script that shows the enclosure location. Let's see, if you get to the point where you're using vSAN 6.7, I think, where we had Update Manager go and make you log in to be able to get a baseline for vSAN. Somebody asked me recently, hey, how do I update that for 60 vCenters? I don't want to do it manually because I've got to go into each cluster and make each setting change and whatnot. And I came up with a little snippet of code that's in there as well. Now, it's about 103 pages, something like that, for that particular document. And about 25% of that is nothing but vSphere and has nothing to do with vSAN whatsoever. All right. In fact, I can probably, we're internet connected, so I should be able to load it just to give you a, thanks. Can't download. Let's see if I can launch a browser and try it real quick. VMware.com/go/PowerCLI for vSAN. And I did this in PDF format because I wanted, if you wanted to print it out, you can. But I wanted links to work to get you easily to different areas. Notice it is version 1.5, which is, again, current as of, if you notice at the top of that page, it'll say May. Right, but I go through some pretty in-depth stuff, whether it be enabling vSAN, adding new hosts, deduplication and compression. Everybody's running NTP correctly across all their hosts, right? A lot of people don't. And I've got a sample script in here on how to configure NTP. But notice, and this is part of the cluster QuickStart, and maybe I don't know how I can zoom here, but maybe I won't. Here we go. Okay, if I'm not using 6.7, I'm still on 6.5 or whatever, right? I mean, I can go into each individual host, but there are a couple commandlets, and what I do in this particular document is I don't say, oh, you need to do this, here's a script. I don't do that. I say, hey, we got to enable this service. Here are the commandlets that we're going to use. Here's, setting it on a single host, and I give an example. But then I also talk about, come on, it's a bit more efficient to configure it uniformly across an entire cluster. And then I go and I show how to do that with an example of adding it into a loop, or all hosts connected to vCenter. Uniform settings often overlooked, blah, 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 right? Okay, configuring DRS and HA, how to set those. Also some advanced settings. What's that? Did somebody say something?
Code capture work with vSAN stuff?
So I'll get to that in just a second. I didn't get that updated into the deck, but 6.7 update 1, we introduced trim and unmap support for vSAN. The only way you could enable it was through the Ruby vSphere console. And so I reached out to our engineering team, and I was like, hey guys, there's got to be a way for me to do this with PowerCLI. And when they announced PowerCLI 11.2, we added the ability to do that to make it a lot easier, or even report on it for that matter. All right, and I can't get into an environment to talk about code capture, but has anybody used vSphere for so long that they are familiar with Onyx? Anybody know what? I figured you would. Onyx was a little proxy plugin that we would use that you would connect to it to run your old vSphere client, and it would connect to vCenter. Now, it wasn't great because it wasn't secure, for one, and you had to kind of go through a proxy to get to your vCenter. And what you would do is you would go and perform things, and when you perform those, it would say, here's the PowerShell code to do that. Okay. Well, as of vSphere 6.7 update 2, there was a fling where it's in like an older host client offline UI, but it's now built into 6.7 update 2. So even if you have older hosts and you're running 6.0 or 6.5 or whatever, you could still upgrade your vCenter and have code capture available to you. It may not show everything. Now, that said, code capture, basically what you do is you'll enable like a red record button. You'll say VM change policy, you'll say power on VM, whatever. And when you hit stop, it will give you the code to actually do that. And you can use that as an example. Like if you want to figure out how to set up a VDS and you do that, it'll show you a method. Maybe not the method, but a method to do it. It's not really good at translating the actual commands over to true PowerShell code. A new object, VDS, blah, 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 parameter for that, set. It'll do something like that. But it'll be enough to give you an idea of what you need to work with. Now, not everything is exposed in that interface. Okay, I've got an open request right now. Customer says, well, look, we spin up hundreds, if not thousands, of vSAN clusters. I want to be able to change the default storage policy for the data store. Can I do that? No. It's not exposed yet. And when I try to do it, I can do it through the UI all day long, and I say, capture that code, and it says, goose egg. Nothing for you. But we're trying to address those one at a time and expose those at some point. Okay. I wish I had another access to another deck because there was another slide that I thought I had. What I'm going to do though before I upload it to the VMUG site is I'll make sure I get a couple other updated slides in there, like how to. Does anybody use ESXCLI, like get ESXCLI from a PowerShell perspective? Okay, so what I can do with get ESXCLI is if I'm sitting at a console and I say ESXCLI vSAN network list, and it shows whatever interfaces I'm using, or if I'm doing ESXCLI vSAN cluster unicast agent list, it gives me a table from that host. With get ESXCLI, I can actually tie that into PowerShell and execute commands that are only available at the console and are not exposed in PowerShell. Right? I actually do a lot of stuff like that. When it comes, I even have in the cookbook. Let's see if I got an example of it real quick. I'll go to the top, and we're almost at our time, but where is it? Oh, here's a good one. Moving VMs off of vSAN host if you don't have DRS. Right? I just randomly pick a host and say, send it over there, send it over there, send it over there, send it over there. Right? This one right here, though, is the one I wanted to talk about. Removing disk groups from hosts no longer in a vSAN cluster. Let's say I've decommissioned a host. I forgot to go and run that ESXCLI vSAN storage remove command. All right. For me to run that command, I've got to have SSH enabled and go and execute it. Well, here what I'm doing is I'm saying, look at host SC9. I'm going to say, give me a list. Notice here, if I type it in, it would be ESXCLI space vSAN space storage space list. I'm invoking that. It gives me a list, drops it into this into the disk group devices. I say disk group count. Let me go and count how many cache devices I have. That'll tell me how many disk groups I have. Report any disk groups. Boom. And if there are disk groups, write it to the host. Well, if there are disk groups, I can then remove those disk groups. And what I do next is using that ESXCLI is I'm saying, okay, give me a list for every disk group device in all the devices. I just need to get rid of that cache device. So if it's a capacity tier, if it's not capacity tier, then I'm good. That's what I want to work with. I remove that cache device. I print it out, and then I say, ESXCLI vSAN storage remove, creating an argument of the device name, and then I'm saying invoke removing that. So instead of you having to go and log into a host that you happen to move out of a vSAN cluster, you can run this set of scripts against that and literally wipe out that vSAN disk group. Again, don't do this on production data. Right? But I mean, people do it all the time, especially like a lot of folks in the VCF that are trying to do their own VCF type thing where they're spinning up clusters and tearing down clusters and spinning up clusters and whatnot. Quite often they'll forget this, and this doesn't care. This will knock all the disk groups out of a host. Okay, lots of stuff in here. I solicit for any cool scripts that anybody has. It's like, hey, I've got a great script. I think you could add this. Please send it to me. I'm easy to reach, jase@vmware.com. Okay, that was hard as hell to get, by the way. Yeah, it took like 2 or 3 trouble tickets. Hey, I want to get this email. So, but, all right, any specific questions, anything I didn't cover as far as how do I do this, or how would you approach this, or anything like that? No? No? All right. You guys are familiar with the L1TF vulnerability, the Intel microcode vulnerability, as well as the new MDS one recently, fix 6.0, 6.5, 6.7. All right, I was talking to a customer in our Broomfield support facility, which is about an hour north of where I live in Colorado, and I was talking to a customer, and I said, well, how many hosts do you have, sir? And he said, I have 1,000. I said, how many of those 1,000 are vulnerable to this risk? And he's like, I don't know. Why? I said, how long would it take for you to find out? And he said, can you give me the afternoon? So how about I point you at a script that you can literally get a list of all the hosts in 30 seconds and point them at a one-liner. Right? Well, I was only checking part of it. You could get more elaborate, but a one-liner to literally say, and you can even get to the point where you go even further and say, well, these hosts in this cluster are not fixed, are not mitigated. These hosts in this cluster, and so on and so forth, and you can drill down. So I look at PowerShell not just from how can I do things operationally, but how can I do ad hoc reporting off of vSAN. Tyler Gates, one of our vSAN SEs based in Dallas, he's like, hey, Jase, man, I got a question. I really, I got this customer. They want to know what the utilization is per disk on every disk group in their cluster. Can you point me at something that'll do that? And I'm like, Tyler, really, dude? I mean, I've got other things to do. And he's like, oh, come on, man, you can do something for me here. Throw me a bone. And so I notice, we've got like different pieces of information here, where it is in the disk group. Capacity, used percent. Hey, there's something I can get some value out of there. Right? So here I'm saying disk 1 for my cluster, get all the hosts, get all the vSAN disks. If it's a cache disk, I'm not worried about it. Disk 1 capacity, boom. Disk 1 used percent, boom. And then I do a little bit of math that I had to look up. And I see that it's my used percent is what, 95% or something like, I forget what it is. But that's just for one disk group. But literally in 20 minutes, I had a script form where I'm even printing out colors based on the percentage used. If it's over this threshold, give me a green, or under this threshold, give me green. Over, give me yellow, give me red. This is out in the cookbook today. You guys can use it. But literally in 20 minutes, I had a full report for him that said, across this cluster, here's where all my disks are utilized. That's not something easily retrievable in the UI. Cool and powerful and free, and the PSO guys hate me, like I said. So. But I was a customer for 15 years. I started using VMware products in '98 before they were even production. Right? I've been there. I've been there for the maintenance windows where I work all day, go home, turn around and come back, 9 o'clock, prep for us having a maintenance window at 11. We work our tails off until 3, and it's like go, no go. We either roll stuff back or we press forward. 5 a.m. comes, we're out of our maintenance window. 6 a.m., no calls. 7 a.m., no calls, we're good. 8 a.m., no calls, we're good. All right, I'm headed to the house. Son of a bitch, I got to turn around and go back to the office. Right? And then you work another 12 hours. I've been there. And that's part of my passion as a technical marketing person, is pointing you guys at stuff like this to help you do your job better and maybe have more time with your families. So, all right, that's about all I have, unless you guys have any additional questions. I really appreciate you guys having me here, and I hope I get the opportunity to come back soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.